Welcome to this intellectual journey through the roots of our own identity. Today we are diving deep into the waters of ancient Greece to find a man, or perhaps a legend, who defined what it means to be human in the Western world. We are talking about Homer, the blind poet whose voice has resonated powerfully across the millennia. Before we begin, a brief note. To bring this narrative to life, I have used artificial intelligence tools to generate the visuals you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of the story we are telling. They will not always be a literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to let your imagination take flight with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. Imagine a time when writing as we know it today did not exist. An era of warriors, myths, and gods who intervened in the affairs of men. In this setting, the figure of Homer emerges, traditionally placed in the 8th century before the Common Era. But who was this author really, and why do his poems remain so alive today? The Homeric question is one of the most fascinating mysteries in literature. Some scholars suggest that Homer was not a single person, but rather a long tradition of oral poets who refined these stories over generations. However, the artistic unity of the Iliad and the Odyssey suggests a mastermind who gave them their definitive form. Let us begin with the Iliad, the poem of war. But it is not just a chronicle of battles. It is a study of the human condition under pressure. The central theme is not the fall of Troy, but the rage of Achilles. This word, rage, is the very first word of the poem, and it sets the tone for the entire conflict to come. To understand Achilles, we must understand the concept of arete, which we could translate as excellence or virtue. In the heroic world, excellence was demonstrated on the battlefield and validated through public honor. A hero without honor was a man without identity, a pariah in a society of proud warriors. Achilles feels deeply insulted when King Agamemnon steals his war prize, Briseis. To us, it might look like a tantrum, but for a Greek hero, this was a mortal wound to his prestige. By withdrawing from the battle, Achilles puts the entire Greek army at risk, proving that the individual can carry more weight than the collective. The Trojan War thus becomes a stage for moral dilemmas. On one side we have Hector, the defender of the city. Hector represents piety, love for family, and duty to the fatherland. He is the human and tragic counterpoint to the almost divine fury of Achilles. His fate is sealed, and he knows it perfectly well. Homer shows us that the gods are not superior moral figures, but powerful and capricious beings who play with mortals. Zeus, Hera, Athena, and Apollo take sides, argue, and pull the strings of fate. This reflects a worldview where chance and higher forces influence our daily path. One of the most moving moments of the Iliad is the meeting between King Priam and Achilles. The elderly king sneaks into the enemy camp to beg for the body of his son, Hector. Here we see shared humanity rising above hatred. Both weep for their losses, recognizing that suffering is the common inheritance of all men. With the death of Hector and the fate of Achilles already set, the Iliad concludes without showing us the final fall of Troy. It leaves us with a sense of irreparable loss. Heroic glory is brilliant, but brief, like a flame that burns out fast. This is the tragedy of human existence according to the early Homeric vision. Now let us cross the sea toward the Odyssey. If the Iliad is the poem of the warrior, the Odyssey is the poem of the traveler. Here, the protagonist is not the impulsive warrior, but the cunning man, Odysseus. He represents a new type of hero, one who survives not just through strength, but through his intellect and his capacity to adapt. It takes Odysseus 10 years to return to his home in Ithaca after another 10 years of war. His journey is a metaphor for life itself, full of temptations, dangers, and the constant struggle not to forget who we are. The concept of nostos, or the homecoming, is the emotional engine that drives every one of his actions. On his way, Odysseus faces monsters like the Cyclops Polyphemus. Here, we see cunning in action. Odysseus does not defeat the giant with a sword, but with wit, calling himself nobody. This scene underscores how intelligence can overcome brute force, a fundamental pillar of later rational thought. The sirens represent another crucial test. Their song promises total knowledge, but at the cost of one's life. Odysseus, wishing to hear but knowing his weakness, has himself tied to the mast. This is a lesson in self-restraint and will, themes that psychology and philosophy would explore centuries later in great detail. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, Penelope resists the pressure of the suitors who want to usurp the throne. She is the mirror of her husband's cunning. By weaving and unweaving the shroud, she proves that intelligence and patience are weapons as powerful as the bow and arrow. Penelope is the guardian of memory and civilization. The Odyssey also presents us with the descent into Hades, the world of the dead. There, Odysseus speaks with the shadows of the past, including his mother and his former comrades in arms. This scene reminds us that the present is always in dialogue with the past, and that our ancestors symbolically walk with us. When he finally reaches Ithaca, Odysseus does not reveal himself immediately. He disguises himself as a beggar, testing the loyalty of his people. This lesson on appearance and reality is central to Greek philosophy. Not all that glitters is gold, and truth often hides beneath the humblest and most unexpected cloaks. The slaughter of the suitors is the violent climax that restores order. But the Odyssey ends not with blood, but with peace and reunion. Social order is reestablished, and the hero finally finds his place in the world. It is a journey from the fragmentation of war to the integrity of family and home. Homer did not just write stories, he created an encyclopedia for life. The ancient Greeks used his poems to learn morality, military strategy, rhetoric, and even geography. To them, Homer was the educator of all Greece, the point of reference for any debate on virtue or the fate of nations. Consider the concept of hubris, or excessive pride. Homer constantly warns about the dangers of believing oneself equal to the gods. This idea that man has limits he must not cross is the origin of the ethics of moderation, which Aristotle would later formalize as the golden mean in his ethical philosophy. Homer's influence on literature is incalculable. From Virgil's Aeneid to James Joyce's Ulysses, Homeric themes have been reinterpreted time and again. Each generation finds in these texts a mirror of its own anxieties and hopes, proving the universality of his archetypes and characters. Even in today's cinema and popular culture, we follow the structure of the hero's journey that Homer perfected. The idea that we must leave the familiar, face terrible trials, and return transformed is the core of almost all our modern stories of self-improvement and personal discovery. But what does Homer tell us about justice? In his poems, justice is often confused with revenge, but there are also glimpses of a higher law. Hospitality, for example, was sacred. Mistreating a stranger was a sin against the gods. This is the seed of human rights and respect for the other. The relationship between the individual and the community is another Homeric pillar. Achilles must decide between his personal pride and the salvation of his compatriots. Odysseus must lead his men, suffering for their mistakes. These dilemmas remain the basis of our sociology and our way of understanding leadership today. Let us talk about beauty in Homer. It is not just aesthetic, it is an almost divine quality. Helen's beauty is capable of moving 1,000 ships and causing a 10-year war. In Greek thought, the beautiful was often linked to the good, an idea that deeply influenced the art and architecture of the entire West. Death in Homer is somber. There is no promise of a radiant paradise for everyone. This gave a vital urgency to existence. If life is short and the end is a pale shadow, then what we do here and now, our fame and our actions, is the only thing that truly lasts forever. The notion of fate, or Moira, is central. Not even the gods can change what is written. However, Homer's characters are not passive puppets. They choose how to face their fate. That struggle between predestination and one's own will is the heart of human freedom as we understand it. Homer's language is rich in epithets, such as swift-footed Achilles or rosy-fingered Dawn. These devices were not just ornaments, they helped the oral poet maintain the rhythm and helped the audience visualize the characters. They created a vivid and recognizable world that felt real to those who heard it. The Odyssey also explores the relationship with the unknown. Monsters and strange lands represent humanity's primal fears of the other. By defeating Scylla, or avoiding the Lotus Eaters, Odysseus is reaffirming the superiority of culture and reason over wild and irrational nature. It is curious to note that despite the violence of war, Homer spends a lot of time describing daily life. The banquets, the care of animals, weaving and mourning. These details humanize the myth, reminding us that even in the midst of great deeds, simple life continues its course with its own dignity. The Iliad teaches us about the fragility of success. Agamemnon, the king of kings, ends up being a man full of doubts and errors. Greatness does not exempt one from stupidity or arrogance. This psychological realism is what separates Homer from flatter myths and turns his characters into beings of flesh and blood. The role of women in these works is complex. Although the world is patriarchal, figures like Athena, Circe, Calypso, and Penelope possess immense power and wisdom. They are not mere objects, but active agents who challenge, help, or direct the male heroes, showing a narrative sophistication surprising for their time. The friendship between Achilles and Patroclus is the emotional engine that changes the course of the war. Their bond is so strong that the death of one unleashes an unstoppable fury in the other. Homer tells us that emotional ties are often more powerful than political duty or personal ambition for power. When analyzing the structure of these poems, we see that they are built with amazing symmetry. Themes repeat and reflect each other as if in a mirror. This verbal architecture not only facilitated memorization, but also endowed the Homeric universe with a sense of cosmic order and deep internal mathematical beauty. Homer is also the father of rhetoric. His characters do not just fight, they debate. The speeches in the Greek assembly are lessons in persuasion, logic, and emotional manipulation. Here, the idea is born that the word is as powerful as the sword in directing the fate of an entire people. The geography of the Odyssey, though sometimes fantastical, reflects the early attempts of the Greeks to map the Mediterranean. It is a hymn to human curiosity and the desire to explore what lies beyond the known horizon, a spirit that would define the expansion of Greek culture throughout the ancient world. Let us talk about piety. Respect for the dead is a recurring theme, both in the ransoming of Hector's body and in the funeral rites of Patroclus. We see that the treatment of the deceased is what separates civilization from barbarism. Culture begins where we start to honor those who are no longer with us. In the Odyssey, the theme of identity is vital. Odysseus spends much of his time hiding who he is. Only when he recovers his name and his position in Ithaca does his journey truly end. This speaks to the importance of social recognition and the stability of one's own personal history for the health of the soul. The concept of sophrosine, or self-mastery, is prefigured in Odysseus's resistance to the sirens, or the forgetfulness of the Lotus Eaters. It is the ability to keep the goal clear despite the distractions of pleasure or fear. This virtue would become the central axis of Stoic philosophy many centuries later. The Iliad shows us that war has no true winners. Even the victors return to destroyed homes or meet death on the way. Homer does not glorify war in a naive way. He shows us its human cost, its filth, and the void it leaves in the hearts of those who survive it. Consider hospitality or xenia. Welcoming a stranger was a religious obligation. This created a safety net in a dangerous world. Homer establishes that kindness to the outsider is the basis of peaceful coexistence between different peoples, a lesson that remains painfully relevant for everyone today. Odysseus's relationship with his son Telemachus represents the transmission of values between generations. Telemachus must learn to be a man by searching for his father. This search for the father figure and for one's roots is a universal theme that resonates in all subsequent literature to this day without losing its power. The deities in Homer also suffer. When Ares is wounded or Aphrodite weeps, we see that pain is something so fundamental that not even the divine is immune to it. This projection of human feelings onto the gods allowed the ancient Greeks to understand their own emotions as something sacred and universal. The shield of Achilles, described in detail in the Iliad, is a microcosm of the world. It shows scenes of war, but also of weddings, trials, and harvests. It is a reminder that even in the midst of the most atrocious conflict, civilized life with its art and its justice remains the ideal to which we aspire. Homer uses the sea as another character. The sea is the path, but also the obstacle. It is the source of life and death. This intimate relationship with the ocean marked the character of Greek civilization as an outward-looking culture, open to trade, exchange, and constant adventure. Tragic irony is another Homeric tool. Often characters act believing they are heading toward one end, only to discover they are fulfilling exactly what they were trying to avoid. This sense that there is a higher logic escaping our understanding is what gives philosophical depth to his stories. Plato, though critical of Homer for his representation of the gods, could not help but quote him constantly. For philosophers, Homer was the rival to beat, the previous belief system they had to rationalize. Without the mythic foundation of Homer, rational Greek philosophy would hardly have found its fundamental questions about being. Let us talk about loyalty. The dog Argos, who recognizes Odysseus after 20 years and dies of joy, is one of the most memorable moments. Homer teaches us that fidelity is not just a human virtue, but a deep bond that connects all living beings in a web of mutual affection. The Odyssey is also a work about memory. The lotus eaters offer a flower that makes one forget home. Odysseus understands that to forget is to die while alive. The memory of who we are and where we come from is what keeps us human and gives us a purpose in the face of the difficulties along the way. In the Iliad, courage is not the absence of fear. Hector feels terror before Achilles and flees around the walls. This humanity makes his final bravery more real. Courage is acting despite fear, a definition that remains the standard of moral integrity in our contemporary culture. Homer's descriptions of sunrise or sunset are not simple pauses. They mark the rhythm of life and man's connection with natural cycles. For Homer, time is not just an arrow moving forward, but a circle that repeats, giving us comfort in the permanence of nature compared to human brevity. The importance of genealogy in Homer served to place each individual in history. Knowing who your father and grandfather were gave you a place in the world. Today, our search for ancestors and family history is an echo of that Homeric need for belonging and continuity over time. Achilles' rage ends when he returns Hector's body. This suggests that catharsis, or the purification of passions, is necessary for mental and social health. We cannot live forever in hatred. Reconciliation, though painful, is the only way for life to continue after tragedy. Odysseus is the first modern individual in literature. He doubts, plans, regrets, and changes his mind. Unlike the monolithic heroes of other cultures, Odysseus has a complex inner life. In him, we see the birth of literary psychology, where the real conflict occurs within the mind of the protagonist. Music and poetry were inseparable in Homer. His verses had a musical rhythm, the dactylic hexameter, which hypnotized the audience. This connection between sound and meaning reminds us that beauty of form is essential for a deep message to be truly heard and remembered by people. Banquets in Homer are moments of social communion. Sharing meat and wine was not just about eating, it was about reaffirming bonds of peace and alliance. In our fragmented society, the shared table remains one of the few spaces where humanity recognizes itself above ideological differences. The Iliad is a critique of blind power. Agamemnon has the title, but Achilles has the strength and the moral reason in their initial dispute. This raises the question of what makes a leader legitimate. Is it inheritance, charisma, or the ability to protect one's own? A question that political science continues to debate. Toward the end of the Odyssey, Odysseus must face his own people. Violence breeds violence, and only the divine intervention of Athena stops the spiral of revenge. Homer warns that without a higher law or a will for peace, societies can destroy themselves in an endless cycle of grudges. The concept of kleos, or eternal glory, is what motivates the heroes. They know they are going to die, but they hope to live on in the songs of the poets. This aspiration for immortality through art and public memory is what has driven great artists and leaders throughout history. Homer also speaks of manual labor with respect. From the swineherd Eumaeus to Queen Penelope weaving, work is seen as a dignified activity. There is no sharp division between intellectual and physical work. Both are part of the arete, or excellence, that makes up a complete human being. The relationship with nature in Homer is vibrant. Homeric comparisons or similes often use animals or natural phenomena to describe human actions. A warrior is like a lion, a crowd like the waves of the sea. This shows a deep integration of man into the biological and physical cosmos. Even old age has its place in Homer. Nestor, the elderly counselor, is listened to for his wisdom and experience, even if he can no longer fight. This reflects a society that values time and accumulated memory, seeing in the elderly a necessary bridge toward stability and good collective judgment. The Odyssey explores the temptation of immortality. Calypso offers Odysseus the chance to be a god and never age if he stays with her. He rejects it to return to his mortal wife and his inevitable death. Homer tells us that our finitude is precisely what gives value and meaning to our love and our lives. The laughter of the gods in the Odyssey, sometimes cruel, reminds us that the universe is not always serious or fair. There is an element of play and absurdity in existence that we must learn to navigate. This acceptance of the tragicomical is one of the greatest lessons of wisdom the poet leaves us. The Iliad and the Odyssey functioned as a kind of cultural constitution for Greece. They unified city-states that were often at war, giving them a common language, common gods, and a shared heroic past. Homer was the architect of Greek unity long before any real political unity existed. Translating Homer has been a challenge for every century. Each translator tries to capture his energy and clarity. This proves that his ideas are like a diamond with many facets. Depending on how we shine the light, he shows us a new lesson about ethics, politics, or the beauty of our own existence. Let us talk about curiosity. Odysseus wants to know, even when it is dangerous. That thirst for knowledge is the engine of progress. Without Odysseus's curiosity, the Greeks would never have left their shores to discover the world and ultimately to found science and the rational investigation of the universe. In Homer, fate is not an excuse for laziness. On the contrary, knowing that time is limited drives the heroes to act with more intensity. Moira is the frame, but the individual paints the picture with their daily decisions. This tension is what makes his stories so vibrant and full of life. The Iliad also teaches us about the importance of mourning. Scenes of weeping are not seen as weakness, but as a necessary relief. Homer understands that to be a complete warrior, one must first be a man capable of feeling and expressing pain for the loss of what he loves. Even enemies are treated with surprising dignity. Homer recognizes the value of the Trojans. There is no total dehumanization of the other, something that much modern propaganda could learn from these ancient texts. Recognizing the humanity in the enemy is the first step toward a lasting and real peace. The Odyssey is, in essence, the story of a reconstruction. After the trauma of war, the hero must rebuild his home, his relationship with his wife, and his role as a citizen. It is a lesson in resilience and the human capacity to heal and start over after the total devastation of a conflict. Homer's style is direct. He does not get lost in unnecessary abstractions. He describes actions, objects, and feelings with a clarity that cuts like a knife. This economy of language is what allows his stories to be so powerful and their emotional impact to be so immediate, even after nearly 3,000 years. Think of the concept of family. Despite all of Odysseus' adventures, his true north is always Penelope and Telemachus. Homer establishes that primary emotional bonds are the foundation upon which the entire building of society and culture is constructed. Without a home to return to, the journey has no meaning. Homeric mythology is not a religion of dogmas, but of stories. This allowed for an intellectual flexibility that later facilitated the rise of philosophy. Since there was no single, unquestionable truth, the Greeks could begin to ask the why of things, using reason as their new tool. The Iliad ends with Hector's funeral. It is a quiet and melancholy end. There are no trumpets of victory. It is a reminder that all our ambitions and conflicts end in the same place, the silence of the earth. This humility before death is the foundation of the wisdom that Homer generously offers us. The Odyssey ends with a forced reconciliation, but with the promise of a lasting peace. Odysseus has gone from being a destroyer of cities to being a builder of homes. This narrative arc is the triumph of civilization over barbarism, of cunning over force, and of love over the blind hatred of war. By studying Homer, we do not just study the past, we study ourselves. His questions are our questions. His fears are our fears. He gave us the map of our own psyche and the narrative tools to understand the complex and often contradictory world in which we still live today. In conclusion, Homer's legacy is the foundation of Western ethics and storytelling. He taught us that life is a struggle, a journey, and a constant search for meaning. That excellence, loyalty, and the word are what make us truly human in the face of the vastness of fate and time. I hope this journey through the Iliad and the Odyssey has awakened in you the same fascination that I feel for these immortal works. Homer continues to whisper in our ears, reminding us that each of us has our own war to fight and our own Ithaca to return to one day with honor. Thank you very much for joining me in this deep analysis. It is an honor to share these ideas with a community of such curious and passionate minds. If this video has helped you see the classics in a new way, my mission as an educator feels more than fulfilled for today. Do not forget to subscribe to keep exploring the great pillars of thought and the humanities together. Comment on which idea or character from Homer impacted you the most, or if you believe that today we need more of Odysseus's cunning or Hector's nobility. I will see you on the next intellectual journey. See you soon!